I'm going to start this walkthrough by stating flat out that I'm a linguist. I am not a Japanese speaker. As such, my pronunciations are going to be terrible, and I'm sorry. I apologize in advance.
But you're not here for pronunciation assistance. You want to know how to add the conjugation expansion deck into your playing.
This is a grammar expansion, and as such, it's really geared for intermediate learners or those who are really familiar with the basic mechanics of the introductory game. If you don't have at least a few semesters of traditional Japanese language courses under your belt, we strongly encourage you to refrain from playing this particular expansion until you're really comfortable with at least the core and 2 or 3 of the expansions, the vocabulary expansions currently available. Regardless of your experience with either Japanese the game or the Japanese language itself, when it comes to conjugations, you might find yourself in for a bit of a struggle. That's okay. That's good.
The uncomfortable place where confusion and even frustration happen is where learning occurs.
That vaguely icky feeling that you get is literally your brain making and creating new connections. The trick is to balance that frustration with enough fun so that you keep playing. We think we've done that. However, if we haven't and you have suggestions, please let us know.
First, let's review what conjugations are in English. A conjugation is how we change a verb to match the person or thing doing the action. I am, you are, he is. Those are conjugations of the verb to be. The purpose of conjugation in English is to tell us about the actor of the sentence. The purpose of conjugation in Japanese is to tell us about the tone of the sentence.
In English, we don't generally use the verb to do that. We use word choice or alternate constructions in other parts of the sentence or the actual tone of our voice when we deliver it to inform the listener about things like passiveness, conditional terms, aggressiveness, etc. Additionally, in Japanese, you also conjugate adjectives, which is absolutely not a thing that happens in English.
If you find that you're really struggling with the conjugations expansion, go through and remove the adjective conjugations. Leave them out of gameplay until you're comfortable with how conjugating verbs works. Then you'll probably find adjective conjugations much more manageable once you add them back in.
One last thing, just to make you really want to pull your hair out, it's a little thing called compound conjugation. This is where you take a word, conjugate it and give it a nice tone, then you take that new word and reconjugate it, layering on an entirely different tone. Both verbs and adjectives can do this. The faster you master conjugation, the faster you can start layering points into your sentences.
The good news is that not all conjugations can be compounded, and if they can, it will say so on the card. Also, just because a conjugation can be compounded doesn't mean that it has to be. It's perfectly fine to conjugate a verb into the passive voice and leave it at that. Take your points and run.
Let's take a closer look at this example, toku, which directly translated into English means to solve.
I'm warning you now, as we conjugate, the direct translations will fall off the rails. This is why your teachers hate it when you insist on transliterating, aka translating word for word. It usually ends badly because language reflects how people think.
Different languages reflect different thought processes, and accurately transferring the meaning and feeling of a concept from one thought process into another requires a lot of zhuzhing. For now, just roll with it. So we have toku, and we want to use our passive conjugation card. First, we have to establish if toku is an ichidan, godan, or irregular verb. The good news for gameplay is that the verb will tell you in the upper right-hand corner on what we've lovingly termed the verb flab. When encountering verbs in the wild, a good rule of thumb is if the verb ends in iru or eru, it's most likely an ichidan verb. There are exceptions, but that's language.
To help conjugate godan verbs, use one of the handy godan conjugation table cards. The passive conjugation card tells us that we need to use base A plus reru. Okay, we see that the last character or kana of toku is what us barbarians might mistake for a less than sign. Over on the godan table, we scan down the leftmost side looking for that hungry alligator. It's second from the top. We then slide to the right until we are in the base A column. This tells us that ku becomes ka, and remember, the conjugation card told us we also needed to add reru. This means that toku becomes tokareru, beautiful. Or in English, to solve becomes to be solved. But wait, passive is now past tense?
Kind of, but not really. And remember, I told you that direct translations were gonna fall off the rails. It gets worse, just stay with me anyway.
But your refill draw gave you a past conjugation, and on your next turn, you get delusions of grandeur. You already know your passive can be compound conjugated. The blurby blurb at the bottom told you so. You're ready to take your tokareru and pastify it. We already know that it's a godan verb, and the past conjugation card tells us that it's simply base ta. Even though the last kana for toku was that right chomping alligator, we're not conjugating toku. We're conjugating tokareru.
Ru doesn't look like an alligator. Ru looks like an elegant 3. We go to our godan table and look, the very first kana looks a lot like a 3. But it's not an elegant 3. This is a 3 that's been written in a hurry by a doctor. So we keep looking down the left-hand side. At the very bottom, we find our elegant 3 and then slide right until we reach the base ta column and discover that our ru turns into ta.
Which means tokareru becomes tokareta, except with only one T because language. Luckily, the pronunciation is practically identical, and you shouldn't be writing Japanese in Romanji anyway, so you're golden. To recap, toku became tokareru, became tokareta, or in English, to solve became to be solved, became to have been solved. I warned you, I really did.
Before we move on to adjective conjugations, let's take a closer look at the example sentence at the bottom of the toku card. You could absolutely say, nazo ga toku, or you solve the mystery.
You could also say, nazo ga tokareru, or the mystery is solved.
But what is provided here, nazo ga tokareta, is the mystery was solved, with both the passive and the past conjugation stacked behind the verb and all those lovely points coming in. Now we have adjective conjugations. The good news is that compared to verbs with their ichidan this and godan that and tables and charts and irregulars, adjective conjugation is relatively straightforward.
Adjectives end in I, and there's only one way to conjugate them. That conjugation is different depending on what tone you're using, but in gameplay it's easy because it's right on the card. Just like verbs, adjectives can also be compound conjugated.
If they can, it will say so on the card. In the wild, adjectives that can be compound conjugated are easy to recognize because they also end in E. In this example, we see that oki gets conjugated into the negative and becomes okikunai. This okikunai also ends in E, so we know that without the card telling us, which it does anyway, that we can compound conjugate it if we so choose. By adding the past tense to this negativization, we make okikunai become okikunakata. See? Simple-ish.
There is bad news. Whenever you conjugate a verb, it always stays a verb. Depending on how you conjugate an adjective, though, pay attention to the conjugation card blurb because it is possible to change the adjective into a totally different part of speech, like an adverb. To recap that, adjectives enhance nouns and adverbs enhance verbs.
I don't know why we don't call adjectives adnouns, but that's a different rant.
In gameplay, adverbs go in very different places in the sentence than adjectives, and they change the sentence meaning considerably.